Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I'm Jonathan. This is my art channel. And today, as you can see, we have a whole new drawing up on the board. It is going to be a continuation of the series of drawings that I'm trying to do in order to make some cards that can be used for as proxies for a certain game called Magic the Gathering. It is also a drawing showcasing some of the D&D history that I'm attempting to put into these drawings. So first up, let's talk about how I did the drawing. Something I haven't shown off before. This is called vine charcoal. It's literally, they take a twiggy, viney weed and turn it into charcoal the same way you make other kinds of charcoal, which is basically you get everything really, really hot, but not a whole lot of oxygen so that it doesn't actually burn away. And kind of let it smolder. The beautiful thing about it is, like, I have guidelines here, and the vine charcoal, as opposed to, say, compressed charcoal, is actually, it's a light enough charcoal that you can actually erase it with your hand, just like I'm doing here. Now, it does leave some residue behind, but this was kind of how I was taught to, unless you're actually using an eraser like this. But this is what I was taught to use in college to kind of plan out structure for a drawing that I was going to do in charcoal in particular, though it obviously has plenty of uses here as the underlying drawing for a charcoal drawing as well. The one thing that can be a little tricky with it is because it is such a light charcoal and it doesn't necessarily leave things behind. It's good for the chalk pastels because it just kind of blends into it and there's not enough of it to alter the colors from the pastels enough to really throw things off. But it does let me sit here and have that drawing of, oh, okay, right, this is what I'm attempting to get to. And yeah, it just kind of leaves us with these nice lines. Some of this I'm less worried about trying to preserve overall, simply because once I start, like, the first thing I'm going to do is block in general colors, and then we move on to coming back and adding detail back into the drawing. And that's where it becomes more crucial to pull detail work back into the piece. But I do want to clean up some of my lines just so that I can leave myself a little bit better drawing to start from. And then in this case, what I am trying to do, as opposed to, say, the sliver, which I don't really have lore in the realm of Canalan for, this is a soldier, and What I just traced in is going to be his unit number. So I'm making this up at the moment, or have been making it up as I've been working on this drawing. But he is part of the Fedras first. I haven't decided how much lore to actually give his unit at this point. That might be one of the discussions that we have as work on this drawing progresses. So it's a unit within the legions, enough that it has its own esprit de corps and whatnot. Kind of like, for many of you, the introduction to the notion that the Roman legions had names comes from watching Gladiator, when Maximus says, commander of the northern armies, general of the Felix Legion. The various Roman legions did end up taking on certain names over the years. I would say perhaps one of the more famous examples of this is the 10th Legion is known as Caesar's Legion, because it was originally founded in it's in present-day Spain, but essentially, from what I have read, it was Caesar went to Spain and raised a legion, which in and of itself, with his political career, was kind of no, that's what you do at this time in your life, when he went about this. But part of the reason he picked Spain as this is where I'm going to raise the legion is he went to specifically some of the parts of Spain that not only did his family now own and control the mines, which, there's a fair point at that point to be made that he's going back home to the people that know him to go, hey, I want to raise an army, and I want you all to be part of my army. Which does make sense. But the other part of it is that actually was also one of the areas where many, many years before, during the Second Punic Wars, Hannibal's major recruiting area was in Spain, because his father, after the First Punic War, if I remember correctly, it's the Barker. I think their family name is Barker, but Hannibal and his family, after the Punic War, Hannibal's father gets governorship in Spain, basically. And it is from there that he gathers the armies that he takes to Italy and, proceeds to go on one of the most fruitless, successful guerrilla warfare campaigns of the ancient world. One might even go so far as to say one of the most successful but ultimately useless guerrilla campaigns the world has seen, much less the ancient world. Because again, he never marched on Rome. He knew he didn't have the strength to take Rome. But he goes in and basically destroys the Italian mainland for a number of years till they finally reach a point where he just doesn't have the resources left to stand up to a Roman legion, and gets driven off of, basically gets driven out of the area. But again, he leaves no lasting changes. It's not like he ever conquered Rome. I would say, in having now studied what I have of Hannibal's campaign, he's most influential to the Romans by teaching them that they could be beaten, and then giving them reason to never let that happen again. Because he doesn't really like I said, he never takes over Rome itself. So he doesn't change the government in anything that it's doing at that point. He just got really good at killing Romans. And the Romans kind of eventually went, well, we're kind of sick of this. So now that you're, like, yes, it's impressive that you brought all of these elephants here. They were pretty much all dead through the Alps. The couple that did survive only made it like a portion of the time that he was in Italy on his rampage. It's like he did all of these things, but ultimately all he really did was set Rome up for the Third Punic War, where they looked across the Mediterranean to Carthage and went, we are going to go ahead and just... You've embarrassed us too much in these last two conflicts. We are going to burn you to the ground. And then invent a whole new saying for... not only we're killing the women and the children, but we're going to make sure that your lands can't be used for feeding anybody for at least a few years. I don't know how effectively, like how long salting the earth really denies use of the land. Presumably it depends how thoroughly one goes about salting the earth. Okay, so this one, now you're going, wait a minute, that's blue, like sky, right? Yes, that will be sky. But let's make this suitably dramatic. And we are going to do this as smoke, as presumably a soldier from a time where melee weapons are still the primary battlefield implement. Would not be using his sword unless it had come to a certain point in the battle wherein his spear was gone, the formation had broken down, and it was, I wouldn't say individual fights, like the notion of the Greek duel reinforced by the stories of like David and Goliath in the Bible. There's evidence that there was time where that was a popular thing. But at the same time, it wasn't, like, that was not necessarily the way of warfare. I think if we were to be able to go back and study ancient battlefields, I think you'd find something a bit more like what we saw in intertribal warfare in between, like, say, the Sioux and the Crow, or things like that, where it's more your warriors all line up, everybody gets a chance to posture and show off. Some of your best people then take military actions of one kind or another. But the notion is nobody really wants to set up just to die. Nobody really wants to... Like, the point is not necessarily to just go in and kill each other till we're all dead. Because that ends up, especially when you're talking tribal warfare, like, it doesn't take too long of trying to kill everybody, and well, then you don't have much of a tribe, which means the next tribe that shows up to do that is probably going to take you down. And I would say, generally speaking, humans tend to avoid those kinds of extension-style engagements, where you're trying to get everything to ride on the outcome of the battle. So as you can tell, I have done some reading and YouTube watching, and I have met or encountered a number of people now who use this designation, and I think it fits very much my interactions with history at this point, and that is, I am not a historian, so don't come to me looking for the that's the way it definitely was. It's more the everything I have encountered has seemed to explain this, or here's the counter that I've seen from other camps about these people and how they would have behaved. So, in that sense, when I am talking about real world history, I take it with a grain of salt that, for one, I know I don't know everything that was happening back then. I'm going off the conjectures of those historians that I have encountered and have told me what they've discovered and postulated based on their examination of events. So, let's shift from our history to my world history, which this takes us now back to the lands of Canalan, where magic and mystery and politics and life happens, some of which happens on a D&D scale of things, and some of it happens in my head as I tell myself stories, and that. So, again, taking into account that this is for token card as a soldier, this is going to tell you some about how I imagine that the legions of the Varn Empire go about enforcing their army onto opponents. So as he is kind of your, as close to a standard issue individual as you're going to find for something like this. So one of the things that I've done, I've always appreciated how Lord of the Rings incorporated the wings that Tolkien describes basically along the same lines that we like to imagine Viking, stereotypical Viking helmets, having the horns coming off of them. Tolkien described the Tower Watch of Gondor having, wings on their helmets, and what I appreciate is, aside from the very ceremonial sets of armor of the Tower Watch and whatnot. Like they just have it now. There's wings pressed into the helmet. Like there's wing motif on your helmet, as opposed to actually, you know, individual feathered appendages to the wings. Whether that was what Tolkien was imagining or not, I don't. At this point, that's one of those where I go, no, they may have started there, and they may have kept that notion of, you know, the wings needing to be a part of how the Gondorian army identified itself in battlefield. But I'm okay with this notion also of going, okay, it has become less and less about what I would consider more of the warrior motif, which is to say that they're spending efforts on having their soldiers look more like individual warriors and integrating it more to, no, we need formations of guys holding equipment to do the things. And while those men are doing that, you know, we just need helmets that won't catch arrows or blows and like direct them in places we don't want them to be directed. You know, it's one of those. I love that conversation that they have in the appendices for the extended edition Lord of the Rings. Which, while I am not one of those people who says you can't ever watch the theatrical releases, I will go ahead and warn you that if you want a look into how those movies can be, the extended editions are definitely the better interpretation, to my mind, of the source material. And those who have a lot more invested in the opinion seem to all similarly have it wasn't perfect, but to tell the Lord of the Rings story is not the easiest task. He definitely did not write a movie-worthy book in and of itself. So you have to do interpretations of scenes, of characters, you know, of certain situations, all that kind of thing. And in the appendices, like, I think Peter Jackson did a good job of explaining, like, we decided our interpretation of this is the major thrust of the movie ultimately is Sam and Frodo get the ring to Mount Doom. Everything that comes along that's not about that has to be evaluated for where it belongs. So it wasn't that they necessarily took away from the story of the rest of the Fellowship after the breaking at the ford. But it became that's the heart of our story that we're telling. So if it's not helping that, then we might have to consider getting rid of it. Actually, I think yes. Okay. Sorry, I was trying to make a decision about the armor, and I think I made what I'm gonna do. So part of the reason I have to figure out stuff about the armor, in addition to the fact that I'm inventing it off things that I do know, is part to do with the Legion. And in the last dynastic shakeup, the Empire of Canalan basically came under the Varn dynasty, V-A-R-N, Varn. In part because they learned to harness a... Oh, that's right. You somehow have a core of, like, black in you. It's basically a magical metal. I've stolen the notion, because that's what you do to create your own stories. You take the stuff that you love from sources that you love, and you include the things that you want and modify those that you don't. So basically a coppery looking material. And it gave them basically special forces troops that could do magically more than everybody else's troops, which is why when the succession, or when the rebellion started to force a change of dynasty, it was the dynasty of the Varn family that came out on top and became the new emperors and empresses. So far, 2 empresses, including the one who is currently ruling, and 1 emperor who was her father, who was assassinated a few decades ago. Court gossip will tell you that there's questions as to whether or not the current empress was involved. However, those kinds of questions also can lead to somebody, well, like a Boeing whistleblower. You know, the kind of person that commits suicide by 2 gunshot wounds to the back of the head randomly in their apartment. That sort of thing. They do have kind of a ruthless hold on the imperial throne at this point, and so we don't talk about whether or not she was actually involved. Nobody's entirely sure, or if she was simply able to bring the family and chaos under control in the wake of her father's poisoning. There's just a lot of questions. However, she's been on the throne now 30 years and is doing very well at controlling things. She doesn't seem to be too tyrannical. However, she's also been shown to be ruthless enough. Most of the powers that could rebel or create problems seem willing to just kind of ride it out for now. So, at least as far as people know, especially in the part of the world where I set my D&D campaigns, she's probably doing a good job of being Empress. Again, when I do talk about the lore and things like that, like, part of it is at some point I would like to release a book that other people could play in this if I get enough people here that want to hear and have a different realm to play D&D in. Let's see, I'm thinking... Yes, I think we're going to start with this. So it's one of those where I want to hand you the, like when we're talking about the Varn Empire. I want to hand you ideas, but if you want to do a political campaign about, you know, how the Empress is losing control out here in the middle of nowhere, by all means. And I will leave you enough clues and pointers to help you influence, like, okay, how would she be reacting? What kinds of forces would she bring to bear on a rebellion this far from her seat of power? She's not the kind of empress that's going to just let things lie if somebody's challenging her authority. But she also seems to have learned the lesson that force doesn't necessarily get the best results when attempting to enforce your will on, particularly on, say, rebellious people out at the edges of your empire. So, you know, I will, if I can build a source book of things, it will be the, well, hey, if you want to go politically, out here, it might look a bit more like this. And then, because I'm not ready necessarily to do the main city of Canalan as a full-on, fleshed-out sort of thing, because it's you're going to end up with a lot of things where if I don't define every street, some folks are going to be upset because, you know, they're like expecting, hey, this should tell us all about every street in the city, who lives there, what they do, who they like, how they, you know, political associations, all that sort of thing. Where I think if I did it, it's going to end up a bit more like what you might see from, if you go to Matt Colville here on YouTube and watch any of his stuff where he's designing capital for his games, you know, the greatest city in this or any age, I'd be okay with developing something like that where it's the, okay, here are the quarters, here are some of the factions that this close to the Crystal Throne are, actually it's probably the Copper Throne, now that I think about it, because she is the Copper Empress. Again, building off the notion that there was a magical metal that her family employed the scientist, researcher, person of interest who eventually figured out how to use magic metal to enhance people and soldiers, to be able to give almost superpowers to your best troops, to earn their loyalty and fealty for going in and even attempting to make an overthrow of a long-established dynasty. And her family has also decided they're going to lean into the fact that jackals have kind of always been associated with them. So it is now also the Jackal Empire, and that can be seen here in the device on his shield, which these shields very much keep in mind the Roman scudo, that, basically was one of the defining parts of a Roman Legionnaire's kit, is their big shield that kind of covered them from many kinds of attack. I mean, obviously they were not impervious, but it definitely added a lot of personal protection. And unlike, say, the Greeks, where, at least in certain points in Greek history, you kind of painted your own totem of things that you thought was going to help either inspire yourself or inspire the gods for help in battle, but it was one of the things that, Greeks would have, even though their phalanxes were these very tightly packed pike formations, basically. On their shields, they kind of displayed their own individual warrior ideations in what they painted on them. Where the Romans kind of went a little bit more like, no, everybody carries the same shield. It's, unless you happen to have rank in the army, it's going to pretty much have the same devices printed on it, and those will all identify who you are to commanding officers, so that the inherent chaos of a melee battle on an ancient battlefield is something that can be overcome very rapidly, and effective orders can be given to the right units at the right time. And I think, actually, this is going to be the base of my copper. So yes, so one of the things for me that's going to be a learning experience on this is how to actually imply metallic finishes in a chalk pastel. Because even while I was looking yesterday at one of the art supply stores in town, I didn't see anybody who was making, like, if I did colored pencil, I could definitely do metallic branding stuff from that. I could theoretically spray this all down with workable fixative, and after I do that, come back in with some colored pencil. But even there, that doesn't really give me the look I want for the metal. So we're going to start with this kind of burnt orange, because this should be burnt sienna. And then see if we can figure out how to appropriately brighten it up to the point where there's... The idea is that it's reasonably well polished. It's a reasonably well polished copper for certain parts of this. For instance, the jackal head and face guard, for all that the rest of the helmet might have been made of steel. And just kind of playing off the notion that, like, a lot of armies throughout the years have their animal trying to think what to call it. Not necessarily because it's a mascot, though some of them do. but kind of the notion that they're embodying the spirit of a wolf or the lions or, you know, what have you. That's why I'm playing off the notion that they have a lot of very distinct jackal-based imagery in their uniforms. So, and at the moment, I'm not super worried about lines. Because again, right now is not time for detail work. Right now is let's cover up the white of the paper and establish basic color areas. The fewer overlaps I have to make, and like overwork better, but so again, this is just kind of your standard Varn Empire, Varn Dynasty era Imperial troop soldier. I have played around with before. They don't necessarily have, like, many people who have looked into, you know, how the Roman Legionnaires did what they did know, you know, they have the big shield, usually carried a couple of javelins, or at least a few javelins, and then their gladius for up close and personal stabbing to death of your enemy. Yeah, so, you know, that part is what it is. Where I'm kind of sitting here going, okay, things have developed far enough. Canalan is also an empire where we have elves, dwarves, humans, halflings, you know, many different kinds of physiologies made up into the that integrate into the army in one way or another. And so they're going to, like, one of the things that I have given the Empire as kind of a notable factor for it is it integrates the best of what it finds. Because that is one of the things that I think the Romans did a very good job overall of going, like, they'd conquer somebody and then they'd learn from the things that went wrong with that campaign. You know, that's how, when it came to the Third Punic War, there was just so much less, like, they knew what they wanted to do, they built the things they needed to do it, and they went and did it and made sure everybody knew, don't screw with us, or this is what you get. And because the Roman Empire is something of a template that I have been using for how the Empire functions in my world, that is one of the qualities that I bring to it. The other inspiration is the Shanshan from Wheel of Time. And so you kind of, again, you have this notion of, like, you can kick our ass, and you might be able to kick our ass in any battle that we happen to fight. But we're going to learn from it, and when we fight you again, we're not going to make those mistakes. Which, you know, having an entire empire of soldiers who have that notion because they're that dedicated to the survival of their homeland can be a rather terrifying prospect if you're going, well, we're going to have to fight those guys. So that's kind of where, you know, we've gotten a number of things. Like I said, I probably draw a little more heavily off of my understandings of, say, Roman development, what have you. But yeah. So, but this is one of the potential faces that you would see enforcing Imperial might. Whether that's during an internal struggle or an expansion. Expansion's not necessarily the name of the game for the Empire at this point in time. At least so far as when I'm running my D&D games. But then again, you know, there's also a world where goblins and orcs are a legitimate military concern. And such a legitimate military concern that the Empire actually offers bounties on finding them. Now, I do my best to go, because of the type of world that I'm playing, when players encounter orcs and goblins in my campaign, they are warned that pretty much any orc or goblin that you find is really just going to be talking to you to see if there's a way, to see if they can figure out a way to talk you into a soup pot. Again, a little bit more of a nod to Tolkien and Robert Jordan with the Trollocs. The thing I don't like about the way undead get used in a lot of the modern D&D setting stuff is they're just... So many players have come along and want to do the sympathetic goblins and the like. Which, you know, again, in and of itself, not necessarily a big deal. But I like doing things that are heroic. And the one thing that you can't do with low-level undead is have them be individuals. Because the low-level undead just don't, like, zombies and skeletons and the like, there's not enough to them to make them uniquely evil. Whereas, if I pull in a goblin, I can have it have personality. I can have it engage with my players and still be able to go, this creature is evil. Whereas, like, the scene that comes to mind most readily is from Eye of the World. If you've not read it, and especially if your only exposure to Wheel of Time is the very unfortunately awful Amazon version, when the attack happens on Edmund's... Why can't I think what the name of the town is? I'll get off the... Edmund's Field. That's right. But when the Trollocs attack there, Rand and his father are out on their farm, and certain things come up during the course of that fight and everything else that are part of how Robert Jordan gets Rand ready to go and leave Emond's Field behind. But one of the things that he has happen is there's an attack on the farm. Tam kind of leads a big fight to go out and makes a huge distraction kind of at the front of the cabin while Rand is left to sneak out the back door, basically. It's kind of the first exposure we get to the notion that Tam Althor knows more of the world outside the borders of the Two Rivers than most of the rest of the Emond's Fielders, in part because he's the only one who bothered to leave at any point. And then he came back. And that, of course, has its own place in Rand's story. But during the course of the fighting to get out of the cabin, Tam gets injured. Rand kind of finds him in the woods and has to go back for supplies because he needs to get I think it's 10 or 15 miles, or it's a few miles anyway, from their little farmstead out on the edge of the woods back into civilization in Emond's Field. And when he goes back into the essentially cabin, as most of us, like, the way it's described is very like Little House on the Prairie description of their home in, I think it's Wisconsin is where they started. Just this kind of only a couple room, barely 2-floor shack where these two bachelors have been living together since Carrie Althor passed. But while he's in there, not only does he see his dad's handiwork in killing the Trollocs that had broken in the front door, but as he's gathering things, a Trolloc comes back and starts talking to him, trying to get him to surrender and pay attention and whatnot. And it is at that point with Tam's sword that you have that kind of classic, the bad guy charges, good guy doesn't really know what he's doing, and fumbles his way into accidentally killing his enemy. And that's what happens in this particular day. But basically he gets told later on by those who know more of the world that essentially, yes, maybe the Trolloc did talk to him, but it was just trying to hold him in place or figure out how to kill him. It wasn't actually... Its offers of friendship and whatnot should never be believed. And so it's that's the kind of interaction I have between what used to be the traditionally monstrous races in D&D and player characters and the like in my games, where it's not that they can't talk, but if you know their language or they've learned Imperial or what have you, you can communicate, but you just kind of know that what they're going to be attempting to do ultimately is try and eat you. And, again, we can have the discussion of the morality of, okay, but do we go ahead and kill them then? What's the right thing to do here? And I'm not going to hand out an answer to that. This is one of those places where I go, the bounty system is entirely the Empire going, we have a problem, we can't just, we'll send units if there's a large enough band of orcs and goblins that got together, because that's the kind of thing that is likely to lead to them attempting to start a major incursion of some kind. So, like, we'll investigate, but, like, you got to talk about a band of goblins that are 200-300 strong, not just the, hey, here's a little 30-40 person goblin tribe that's coming in and making problems. Which then obviously conveniently leaves me the capacity to go, adventurers are perhaps not looked on favorably everywhere, because whether an adventurer is actually worth having near your town comes down to how that adventurer ends up behaving while it's around. And there's as much variation on these in an adventuring group as there is for any group that you would find that has decided they were going to make their living killing things. You know, there are some of them that are absolutely wonderful people. They're making, you know, they're doing their best to use skills they have to keep other people from having to learn how to defend themselves, and all that. But I don't actually officially, like, I haven't actually officially decided that, yes, absolutely, there's no redeeming qualities to these things. It's more, everybody says it and acts this way. Which I think does give you room to, if you want to play the card of, here's a more complex evil than just seeing goblin bad. Because I do think I do think there's a place in certain types of role-playing games to explore the, okay, are certain creatures, characters, peoples inherently bad because they are those kinds of things? You know, again, one of the ones that I'll go to story-wise is Salvatore's takes on the Drow. You know, you have the, okay, this is a chaotic evil race, but at the same time, a race is made up of individuals. Those individuals are going to each have different sets. So how do you deal with you know, if you're born into a society where might makes the most right, and essentially if you can hold on to it, you can take it. If you can take it and hold on to it, it's rightfully yours. You know, and then you have the counter of that of Drizzt Do'Urden, who is a very, very interesting, like, I stopped reading the books after they started doing the stuff with the Thaylen wizards and everything became about fighting undead, and we had made up with all of the goblin and orc tribes. There just seemed to be something, it seemed like he lost some of his steam in telling the story of this elf who's going to live to see many, many different iterations of society now that he's out there. And I think part of it is there's so many books where Drizzt is with his core group, and I don't feel like he introduced any new characters that I felt were compelling to me. Which is not to say that it was, like, his writing was any better or worse than it had been before. It just, what I encountered kind of as they started killing off Wolfgar and Björnar and Catigree and everybody else, like, I liked a couple of the stories that he told in doing that. I feel like he gave them a good send-off, but I don't think he didn't make a group that I feel like was worthy of Drizzt's story to join him. Now again, I kind of stopped there as he was in the midst of killing everybody off to start the new era in Drist's life. It just became like, okay, we're all doing, you know, let's just do grimdark. Everything has to be the darkest possible whatever's. You know, and I get, for drama, you at some point you can't just have the and they all lived happily ever after, because, well, now we're out of story. You know, so again, it's not like I don't understand some of the things that were going on there, as well as, of course, his stories with Drist and the rest of that group were kind of in that weird limbo of, like, I know Wizards gave him a certain amount of freedom to write the story he wanted to write, but at the same time, you know, he's got to take into account major events that are happening in the world, as far as, you know, things that are getting put into the gaming books and, you know, interacting with people. And it just, I think it felt like it went from being the Drist of the Icewind Dale trilogy and the reclamation of the halls to it's just sort of like, okay, now we're going on a world tour. Hey, I mentioned that they went to this place and they went to that place, and hey, isn't this fun running all over the Sword Coast? And there definitely has to be a place for that when your books are set into, like, I think that's the hard part about the writing for the Forgotten Realms, that we don't all necessarily consider when we're reading and get upset. Of you got to match the brand as you're going through things, and it felt like after he had done a few of the recapture of Mithril Hall, and especially once he let Wolfgar just run off into the tundra, it just lost some of the higher adventure, free-spirited, we're going and doing our thing that, okay, maybe it is influencing the world somehow, but that's not necessarily the kind of thing that you're going to see reflected in the books. The way that it was for other things. And I just... So, because, like I said, I really did appreciate the keeping it on the 5 from Icewind Dale. You know, I do appreciate the, hey, we have Bjornar, who's, of course, the old dwarf, and he's old enough that you can go, okay, we're playing with an old man, and not just because he played daddy for Catti-brie and Wolfgar. He legitimately is an old dwarf. Kind of used the last of his attempts to influence the world to reestablish his homeland. You know, kind of setting him up for he's going to retire, and not super long after he retires, he's also going to die because, well, he's an old dwarf and he doesn't have eternal life. It's not how dwarves work. But yeah, there came a point where I'm like, I'm just not feeling the same level of adventure, it became kind of to me okay, now we have to do the tour of this part of the world, and oh look, he's kind of getting tangentially involved in the big movements of, what's coming out for the various adventure companion, or, adventures that are coming out. And, again, it's a hard road to navigate, I'm sure, of these are my individual characters that live in this world. But I've now established them in time, and as more products get made, and especially because I made I don't want to say mistake, but I took the option of creating an elf character, and he's been so successful, they're going to want me to continue him on as we move to new eras of the world. And so now I have to come up with ways of doing that. And it just, for me, it started not landing. And again, this isn't that he was telling a worse story or anything. It just, it's kind of the same way, like, I've moved on in many ways from... Really just dropped you down there. In many ways, as much as I will always appreciate the Star Wars universe, I've moved intellectually beyond some of the notions that they've done. Like, philosophically, I have to sit there and be like, well, you guys are inconsistent about your own philosophies. Not that that's unheard of or unexpected, but again, the Jedi are guardians of peace and justice. And yet every Jedi we've seen pulls out a lightsaber at some point. And I'm not saying that they're pulling them out at the wrong points. For me, it became one of those Amidala's jokes about this being aggressive in negotiations just becomes too real. And I guess some of it is... I read so much of the extended universe, the stuff that happened between Return of the Jedi and when they started making the prequels, that I just have this different sense of there are ways to have dramatic problems for people in this universe. And yes, much of that is still open conflict. But it's so much, like, I feel like some of those authors just are unappreciated for how complex they made Star Wars. And then as Star Wars was moved from Lucas to Disney, like, we lost any opportunity we had at it being a franchise with nuance to it. Like, I'm kind of okay with the whole, like, well, we have aggressive negotiations and whatnot. We're mostly paying that just lip service because it sounds better rather than just, we're the big bad New Republic, or we're the big bad Republic, and we're going to make things happen because we said so from Coruscant. Like at one point, I really have to sit there and go, like, there's a tiny level of sympathy in me for the Trade Federation when you look at some of the stuff that's going on Coruscant, to go like, yeah, I'd be willing to sit there and be like, well, what if I make you guys, follow my rules because we did a thing and then essentially I haven't gotten my due from that. And so, yeah, I want to make it right. And we all know that the government's going to do jack and crap about it. So, yeah, I'm going to throw my army at you and see what happens. But, yeah, there are places and times and things that I'm now going, I want more nuance to my story. Than what typically gets offered. Because nuance takes time and effort. And that's not the kind of thing that most entertainment puts together these days. It's let's get it out, and let's get a lot of it out so that they can binge it. Because if we can keep their attention while they're binge watching it, then we can keep making money off of them. And again, we're talking about companies. I have nothing against a company trying to earn money by doing what it does. But you really do have to find the point at which you have to understand what you're doing, and not just go, oh, hey, you have an art housey sounding thing. Let's have you come along to this well-established franchise and put your own, basically give us an ideological portrait of yourself rather than telling a compelling story using the franchise that we just gave you access to. Because I feel like there's a lot of that happening, especially with some of the things that have been coming out in the last few years for Star Wars, where it's just like, I think a lot of the same things happened with, like, this is why I'm so frustrated with the Wheel of Time. Like, they put so much time and effort and money into that series, and I feel like they had a couple of the actors right to really push that to be worthy of the source material. And then I got through season 1, and I went, okay, we're throwing out like 3/4 of the first book, which I do get, because you don't know if you're going to have more than one season, and all of that. But they never gave me like, unlike adapting Lord of the Rings and cutting out, a section like the Tom Bombadil stuff, or adjusting Faramir's character where he becomes a roadblock for Sam and Frodo and Gollum. With the Wheel of Time, they just went, okay, we've got the name, we know we need to talk about these things because that's what happens in this universe. And it's so frustrating because there's so much that could be done in that universe and is not in that series. Because they basically went, we're going to use the names and the, like, absolutely loosest interpretation of the worst parts of these characters to create something that should almost completely alienate an established and eager fan base. And yeah, I don't have any time or respect for folks who do that. Because while there are certain things that I get to in Wheel of Time now as I read, that again I go, I'd have seen a different way of dealing with this problem. Or I wouldn't have pushed the problem in the direction that Jordan chose to. Now, part of that is also, it was never my story. The only claim I can make to it now is as a reader engaging with the books that have been written. But yeah, there's a few places that I go, okay, you're trying to stretch drama on too far here, not dealing with certain things. Like, we're having the same argument between these characters here that we've had in the last 3 books. Like, and some of that is just, that's really, like, it's 15 books, if you count the prelude and the fact that the ending got turned into 3 books in and of itself. So, like, I totally get there's a lot of material to work with and try to remember who did what, and give them consistent voices throughout. I think Robert did a great job with the bits that he wrote, and I think I will admit that Wheel of Time was my introduction to Brandon Sanderson. I don't think I'm particularly unique in that, because, you know, it was a huge deal of like, okay, he passed. Who in the world can possibly finish these books? And then when I read them and realized, like, okay, now I hadn't realized until one of the times I was watching the interview with Brandon, he kind of basically said, like, sorry, my books are over there. So Gathering Storm and then Memory of Light were more or less good to go when Harriet brought him on. Like, there was cleanup to do and, you know, pulling scenes together to set some things up and so on. But, like, he basically says the beginning and the end of the ending were written. It was all of the meat of the how do we set the final pieces in place for Memory of Light, that he kind of had to scramble to go, okay, well, we got to get this character out of this dire situation. We got to move these characters through here. We got to do, you know, all these kinds of things. And then, oh yeah, then I have to write a book that the audiobook is a work week. The audiobook for Memory of Light is 40 hours long. I think it's actually 42 hours long. And I will say it this way, not to disrespect people who have experienced actual battle fatigue, but 40 pages of the last battle had me sitting there going, I am wrung out and dry and I have nothing left to give. And it was such an amazing way to finish off the series, you know, that had gone on for decades, loved by so many people. And that, like, we still got to the end of it, I'm like, I am exhausted. I just want to lay down and not do anything and not move. I am done. And I think that is an incredible testament to how that book was written, that is what you feel when you get to the end of it. Because again, it's, you know, I think 1,000 pages or so. And almost all of it is some kind of conflict and battle. So like I said, when you're talking about it, the audiobook takes 1 work week of 40 hours to read to you. Like, that's a lot. It's not exactly surprising that you would feel something akin to battle fatigue and just want to set the book down and go. So, I still haven't spent a whole lot of time talking about this guy. I think part of it right now is just a matter of I have too many decisions to make. My brain is more comfortable for the moment attempting to discuss other things that are coming into my head than trying to spend too much time with him. And, you know, like I said, there's only so much of his personal life that I necessarily have bothered to sort out prior to starting this drawing, because he's not necessarily a main character in anything that I've put together for Canalan so far. He's more the prototype. And I'll have to grab it one of these times. I have an ink drawing that I did giving some idea of like how the battle tactics for the Varn Empire are different than those that you would have seen from Romans, that you would see even from the Shanchan, and how they handle problems as an army. We're just going to bring his beard down. He's got a big beard. Or a sizable beard at any rate. A notable beard. But, yeah. So, and the thing that he's missing at this point in the battle is he doesn't have his spear. But basically, instead of having everybody be like, hey, they've all got swords, the typical battle line as far as the Varn Empire is concerned is you have basically a mixed unit of spearmen and axemen. The spears kind of keep the hordes from getting right on top of your group, but like then you also have those who train with long axes. So if you know anything about weapons, and I say the Danish axe, that's basically what I'm imagining the axeman wielding. That longer handled, we can project out from a battle formation and chop to kill in places where we can, while or if the spearmen get us moving forward, we can sit there and chop, the enemies that didn't die from spear points and whatnot. But we have some reach. It's not like we have to be, you have to get into tomahawk range or something like that to use the axes. So, I'm going to blend that beard a little. But yeah, so this is going to be the next few videos, shorts, what have you. We'll be working on this soldier token. So if you've managed to stick around this long, I can't believe I've forgotten to say so before now. But please help the channel grow. Do all the things that please the algorithm matrices. Like, favorite, and would absolutely be thrilled if you subscribe. I don't have anything put in place, and I don't think the channel's even in the state where they'll let me create a join. When I am and do, that will certainly be something I would love you to do. But yeah, this is, of course, most digital marketing at this point. I'm trying to get some momentum moving. Anything you can do to get numbers to these videos and others that I post is greatly appreciated, because I want to be able to share all of this with you guys, and have the resources available to continue making it something where people's interest can grow and be rewarded for growing. That is too purple. There we go. I'm gonna have some red. I might throw some purple into parts of it. I think that would be if I have come up with a different token or creature that needs to stand out more particularly. I'm going to keep this a dirty-ish reddish. So not too Roman red, but not also brown, because that's an affectation of Hollywood. For most of history, humanity has liked making bright garments to wear. It just that dyes and whatnot costs money, and they always have. It's why Roman purple was, reds and purples were so expensive. Because red is less so because it's more easily discovered and manufactured. But purple is definitely not a simple color to manufacture for a dye. And so it was necessarily expensive, which is why purple is kind of the heraldic royal color, because purple is hard to obtain. And you know, it's weird for us in the modern day because cloth and clothing are so easily and cheaply made that we don't think about it. But it used to be like, part of the reason that you only had two good suits was they were, or two good outfits were, materials expensive. You know, and if you've ever watched the folks who are bravely going back and, you know, relearning how we used to make fabric, it's a time-consuming process. Yeah, so I think I'm going to call it, because I need to get ready to get out on the road, and I also want to get this video uploaded before I do that. So I'm going to call it there. Again, thanks for stopping by. Anything you can do to support the channel is greatly appreciated, and I will see you all in the next one.